Sweet. I really wanted to run this workshop just to give people an idea of my work. For those who have been following for some time, it's taken a few twists and turns along the way. And I think a bunch of people here are like completely new to my work and haven't at all seen what it's about. So I'll give a basic overview just so there's a nice frame of context for what I'm about to present. My training started in about 2003, where I met a Chinese guy in Canberra, Australia, of all places. And he was teaching traditional arts, Xinyi, Liu He Chuan, and Yang style Tai Chi and Cha Chuan. Xinyi and Tai Chi are commonly referred to as internal arts. They belong to this family of Chinese internal arts. And the way that teacher taught was very much about health. So we didn't really do any martial drills or anything like this. So it was almost like a Qigong class. And I stayed with that teacher for 10 years before he closed the school and stopped teaching. Towards the end of, I think it was 2010, I started, or maybe even a bit earlier, 2009, I started looking into all sorts of other modes of self-development, cultivation, whatever you want to call it. I trained gymnastics strength for a while with the Gymnastics Bodies program. I got into parkour and natural movement. I got into general strength and flexibility. I became a personal trainer. I found out a guy named Kit Lachlan, who some of you might know. His work's called stretch therapy. He lived about a block from me. And so I started hanging out with him and hassling him and learning all about his approach to stretching and discovering the body through that mode. And I was also very good friends with a guy named Simon Thacker, who's got a body of work called Ancestral Movement, that he's kind of becoming a big deal these days. He's got a lot of people showing up to his retreats and things like that. And he had an exploration of the body through an ancestral lens where the idea was basically like we started out as blobs and then kind of have this fish body still in us and the reptile body still in us and so on. It's a pretty interesting body of work. So recommend checking that out. With Simon, I started a retreat, a bush retreat here in Australia, where it was like 7 days in the wilderness of just hanging out and training anything and everything, wilderness skills and so on. And I ran, I think, 9 retreats with Simon before I ended up giving the retreat over to him. And he now runs them very successfully for the last 10 years or so, I think. And around that time, 2014, I started training in a Taoist school with a teacher named Serge Augier. And I kept that up for a decade until late last year when I decided that part of my path had run its course and I needed to explore other things. And so at the end of last year, I decided to branch away from that Taoist school and do my own things. There are a whole host of reasons for that. I won't go into it here, but really my interest started to go a little bit like this. So I've got this huge kind of melting pot of stuff influencing my thought and the approach I take. And there's probably maybe 2 other interests that are a little bit less direct, where I haven't. One was kind of direct. A teacher named Adyashanti, who probably, if you're into the spiritual community, you will have heard of him. He's got a stack of books, and I was very grateful to attend one of his 7-day retreats in New York, where these retreats have 200 people in them and something, and people asking questions. And I threw my hand up on the second night and got a direct audience with him, which was looking back a kind of pivot point for me, even though it was only 7 days of exposure. I've been following his writing and his books and things for a long time, and the influence from his methodology or his orientations is really, really heavy in my work. And the other person who's a little bit more maybe not new, I think I heard of his stuff probably back in 2015, but only really started looking into it in the last year and a half or so, is Damo Mitchell. He's got a big body of work on neigong as well, which has definitely had its influence on me. The things he talks about in his podcast, the clues he's thrown out there has just been like, whoa, that's really interesting. And I've kind of followed some of those clues in my own work and put it to the test to see how it affects what I'm interested in. And so today I really wanted to try and get across what I'm interested in, because I use tools from all of these places, but I'm really doing something quite particular with those tools. And it's not the same thing as lots of other people with the same tools are doing. So I kind of wanted to get that across, that this shift in the bigger vision kind of changes the way you use the tools, and eventually changes the outcome. The thing I've been kind of fundamentally interested in, and this is a little bit coming from Adyashanti's influence, is how can I connect to what's going on in this moment in reality more fully, and not get so caught up in what's going to come tomorrow and what's going to come the next day. With anything that has this linear progression of skills, there's always a bigger fish, right? No matter what system you get into, no matter how good you are, there's always someone who's a bit better than you. And you talk to anyone, and even experts are like, yeah, but I talked to this guy and he's way better than me. And this thing kind of seemed like the never-ending dissatisfaction of the modern world. I'll be happy when I just achieve, from the neigong perspective, there's like more grounding, better dantian, fuller, more connected, whatever. And so I really wanted to get away from this. I really wanted to get to this idea, like, how can I connect to how I am now, however wonky that may be, and make that connection perpetually kind of grow. So it's not really about an advancement through levels of skills. It's more about a connection to what's going on. And so it became more relational than skill-based. How do I relate to where I am? And how can I improve that relationship? And this is a really key thing I'm hoping to get across today, because all of the stuff I present, of course, has a level of skill, and you can progress through that. All of the stuff I present, I'm sure you can find someone somewhere that is better than me at it by either small or big margins, depending on where in the world you go and who you happen to have run into. Likewise, all of this stuff, you can find a gazillion and one people who are way worse than I am at it. So that's not the thing I really want to focus on. I don't want to focus today on the actual level of skill. That's interesting, but it's not as interesting to me as how I connect to how I am at this point in time, and how, yeah, that kind of unmeasurable relationship that I have with both myself and the world around me at this point in time. I decided to start that exploration, and I'm really, really heavily influenced by the Taoist vision of things. And the way I learned the Taoist approach was to start from the yin, to start from inside, and kind of build up from inside to outside. So I'm doing the same with this relational approach. I want to relate to myself first, because if I can't relate to myself, that makes it very difficult to relate to other people, which makes it also difficult to relate to the environment and the bigger picture and so on. So I really find that the body is a very interesting place to start this. How do I relate to my body? How do I relate to what's going on in my body? Do I even know what's going on in my body? And this is maybe the starting line for my work. I originally called the idea body awakening, to awaken to what's going on in the body. And even when I was teaching natural movement and parkour, it was all about, why do I put my right hand down rather than my left hand? Why does my body avoid using certain patterns and not others? What's not available to the system that's making it choose those particular pathways? And the stretch therapy work I did with Kit Lachlan was very much the same. You'd go into a stretch, and in a deep stretch, the body really, really avoids going onto particular lines of stretch. And his system was all about, like, how do you actually go into those avoided lines rather than escaping them, and then kind of revealing this thing, and then also training the response to that, because often when you go into the unknown, the system panics and really tries to find a way out. So this is kind of what I'm interested in. I'm not only interested in doing it internally, but also externally. And so I've also spent a great deal of time exploring animism and magical systems, which essentially use the imaginal part of our mind to connect and build relationship with the outside world, outside agency, nature and spirit and whatever else you have. The other thing that really drives what I do and how I do it is I have this big urge to say, why is it like that? I'm not really someone, if a teacher comes up to me and says, this is a good exercise, do it. I'll do the exercise, but I'll ask, why is that a good exercise? What's the function of that exercise that's making it work that way? And from the stretching side of things, people saying this is a good exercise for splits, it wasn't enough for me to say, okay, I'll just do that exercise and like mark it as good exercise for splits in my mind. I really wanted to know what was making it an effective exercise. And so on the flexibility side of things, I was really looking at how the muscles function, in the shortened position, in the lengthened position, how they take load or relax in those positions, and so on and so forth. Using muscles statically and dynamically and things like this. So I had this kind of mindset when I came into the Taoist training and neigong and alchemy and things like this, where I really wanted to know, okay, cool, there's this set of whatever, however many, Taoists really like numerology, so it's always like 8 exercises or 16 or some special number worth of exercises that are meant to do something. And I wasn't so interested in, okay, that's a traditional set, so I'll just assume that that's how it's meant to be done. But rather, I'd look how that worked and what it was doing to me and what it could develop and why and all of this. I had this real need to kind of almost like pull it to bits and reverse engineer it. So where I am now is I've really found that the internal arts, neigong, qigong, whatever you want to call them, of the Chinese and Taoist self-cultivation arts are really, really super useful tools for making this connection to the body and to the more subtle realms of the body and discovering the hidden parts that we can't connect with. And also that one of the principles that the Taoists and Chinese martial arts use, particularly the internal arts, is this concept of release, which was very heavily featured in the stretch therapy work I did. You'd go into a big stretch and then you'd learn how to release the battle with that so you could sink into that stretch more. And I really liked that principle, and I really liked how the internal arts of China brought that principle globally through the body. So I was really interested in discovering the function of that. And so I'm here now with basically an essence of approaching the work that doesn't necessarily fit under one umbrella, but what I wanted to share is this kind of foundation that if you take this essence, you can go into any class and be like, cool, that's what they're teaching and that's how they're making it work, and have a really nice understanding of the mechanism behind what they're doing. And then you start to see, okay, this school, they do it like that. That works really well, but that system also misses this part. This school, they do it like that. You can kind of get some clarity, and then you can maybe make some better choices about which school you want to go in or which practice you want to pursue, and not really necessarily make it a better or worse idea, but more like just a clarity. This one does this, that does that, that does that, and they all do different things, and they don't all arrive at the same spot, even if the language used by all these people is the same. And so, yeah, I wanted to present kind of an underlying foundation today that hopefully all you guys participating can take with you and apply to whatever you're doing, and see if it can bring some light to what you're training. And of course, for those people who are interested, I do coach people myself. So if you want full coaching, you want full guidance, I can provide that too. But I'm really happy to work with both camps. You don't have to go all in on my work to get a benefit from it. But if you like my work, I'm very happy to give the full amount of guidance. And there's a lot of experience in my past through lots of different avenues. The other thing that having this big mush of practices has done for me is so often, people say, in internal arts, you can't do this and that because that's bad for it, or in this, we don't do it this way, those people do it this way, and that's wrong. And I haven't ever really found that to be the case. The only people that really say that are people who don't have experience with that other thing, and so don't actually really understand how it works. Stretching is one of the the prime things that suffer from that, assuming people understand what stretching is, and you know that's just a big topic all on its own, and with many different ways. And most of these arts are not about the art at all. It's about the person presenting that brings the efficacy. Yeah, so bringing in that idea of what is it doing and how is it doing it. I did have a slideshow presented to kind of give a bit of background in the Taoist arts. I might not do that now. I might just kind of blast through it quickly and we can have a few questions about that. But short story is Taoism is not really one thing. If you go into the history deep enough and closer enough to it's this big melting pot where Buddhists and yogis and like local Chinese groups, and you know, you go back far enough and China's not even one place, you know, it's all these warring states, and there's this group here that have this I Ching theory, and this group over there have this five elements theory, and these people over here have some physical practice, and you know, it's just been smushed together. And there are some religious lineages of that. There are some kind of maybe family lines of that where just a person has their body of knowledge that they've transmitted to the next generation, and that body of knowledge is carried through from father to son, from master to apprentice for so many years, and it might not even have any formal organization behind it. And there's a bunch of people trying to, like academics, really trying to clarify, well, what makes a Taoist, and you get back far enough before like Lao Tzu's writings, and there's not even, it's just a word that means a path or a way of cultivation. And so Buddhists were Taoists, and Christians were Taoists, and anyone who was on a path of self-cultivation were called Taoists, because Tao, the character, just means a path or a way. I use it kind of in that sense because I have the frameworks from the tradition I studied for 10 years, but I'm not part of that school anymore. But the frameworks still influence me. So I use yin yang theory, I use five elements theory or five phases theory quite a lot in my work. And so I still generally let myself live under the Taoist umbrella, but it's definitely not in a formal way at all. It's almost like the thinking has influenced me enough and affected my work enough that better term than whatever other terms there are. I also use the term neigong because I really like this term. In Mandarin, nei means internal, inside, inner. Gong is a term, for those that don't know, it's the same gong in the word kung fu or gong fu if you use a more standardized pronunciation. And this word gong just means to train something till you're good at it, essentially, to have skill at something from effort. And so neigong means to train the insides, which I find is a really nice term that kind of just umbrellas roughly what I'm doing, training the relationship to the insides. You have a more modern term, qigong, and qi is this word that means, I don't know, energy, or you know, you could do a whole seminar just on the meaning of that word. And even if you somehow got a technically correct word, the next person just has a different meaning in their brain. So it's a really hard term to use because so many people have so many interpretations of what the term means. Even if you're kind of historically accurate, it doesn't necessarily mean the average Joe is gonna have the same meaning as you. So yeah, I'm a bit like reluctant to use that term. I like neigong. It's a lot more simplified. You also have people who take the two terms and say, no, neigong is definitely this and qigong is definitely this, which makes it difficult. And then within the practices itself, and I'm seeing, you know, some of the people kind of nodding along. I'd imagine some people connected now are possibly involved with the internal arts communities around the world and might have a better understanding of the terms I'm using. But there's so many arguments in communities about what's internal and what's external. And, you know, this is the most boring old argument ever. Again, I don't care to globally define it, but I do want to make clear what I mean when I use these terms. So for me, external is any movement that's led by the intent moving the physical body. So if I have my hand here and I want to move it to here and I make my hand move like that, that's an external movement. Even if I'm moving very slow and well coordinated, it's still external. It doesn't matter how pretty it looks. When my intent changes and I leave the movement alone and I play with things like release, things like shifting where I'm listening to in my body, and that causes my body to react, and that reaction causes a movement, then by my definition, we've changed realms to internal. They're also very, very blurry realms that have a really big crossover, because I can have a little bit of intent on the movement or an intent to maybe release a muscle that causes an energetic movement that then causes another movement to happen. So there's also definitely a blurry crossover. You won't find this exercise is internal, this exercise is external. But generally, in the big picture, people tend to move from coordinating limbs and body positions and things like that. After that is working okay, then they can work with this more subtle realm of changing the intent, changing the mind, changing the effect of how they pay attention, which causes the movements to change, which is kind of like a gradual turn into the internal realm. Any questions so far? We might have just a bit of a breather, because that was a bit of a vomit of words and history and things from me. So does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask before we carry on? Cool. If you do have any questions when I ask that, just unmute and ask your questions. I can see here on my other screen who's muted and unmuted, so that should make it easy enough for me. And I don't think there's so many people here that we need to do the raising hands thing. The way I approach internal training is by looking at two basic qualities, and then these two basic qualities form the yang and the yin that we slowly stitch together to make a yin-yang union harmony between these opposites. The two opposites are the process of opening or separating, spreading apart, and the process of release. When I say opening, I physically mean in the start, like literally separating the tissues, putting space in the joints, taking the top of the head away from the bottom of the head. Even something like this is an opening of the arm. So taking the arm further away from the shoulder, for example, is an opening. So there are plenty of physical openings that can happen, and there's a need at the start to artificially open from the perspective I have, where you need to actually separate the tissues artificially with your intent, with the positioning, with the alignment, to get this opening effect. In a more metaphysical way, opening is a revealing of something that we can't currently see, aren't aware of. So when I separate my tissues like that, what I tend to reveal are tensions that I don't normally feel. If I have my neck just how it normally is and I start to separate the top of the neck from the bottom of the neck, suddenly a bunch of tension appears in my neck that I can't normally feel. So this is the kind of metaphysical opening, this opening of awareness to some hidden thing. And this I'd like everyone to keep in the back of their mind, because I take the opening idea out of the physical realm at some point too. Physically speaking, by opening the tissues, you will reveal hidden tensions. And our first job is to kind of tease these tensions out from hiding by opening and placing the alignment in a particular way. The second effect that I'm really interested in is release, and that's the letting go of holding, letting go of tension. That's like the softening, the melting effect. In the Chinese arts, it's called song. Opening is called kai. And song is really this idea of just melting out the tension from things. I call these opposites because if you have one without the other, things start to go wrong. If I just open my flesh, things start to get tense. And if I keep opening my flesh and just taking everything away, it gets tenser and tenser and tenser and tenser and tenser. And the more I push into the realm of opening, the more tight everything gets. I get rigid. And if I really, really push it like as far as I can, I'm just like a stuck board and I can't really do anything. I don't end up tense. I don't end up soft anymore. On the flip side, if I just release and release and release, my system will collapse. It will slowly fold in on itself and I'll fall over, I'll lose my structure, I'll lose my integrity. So release and opening need to work together. And to get it to work together in the start, you kind of have to have this swing where you open, the tension is there, you try and release that tension, your structure collapses, you open again, and it has this back and forth thing that you have to do. And for those people who are a bit like, what's he talking about, open and release? We'll do it in a second with some exercises so you can get a direct feeling. For the people who've trained the internal arts in some capacity before, you may already have a little idea of how this is going to go. But you have this opening and you have this releasing. At some point, they start to meet and opening causes release and release causes opening. From my perspective, what's happening here is you have the intent to make an opening and then the intent to make a tension release. And that tension will release to some degree, and there'll be some tension left that just won't release no matter how much we go, hey, let go, let go, let go. It'll just be stuck there. And likewise, I try to open, but there'll be some sticking points that just won't open no matter how much you try. The more you have this back and forth of opening when you notice a collapse, releasing when you notice a tension, opening when you notice a collapse, releasing when you notice a tension, slowly but surely, the unconscious, the body, starts to get the hang of what you're instructing. At some point, you can back off the intent and the unconscious is like, we're doing this thing, right? And it starts to open parts of your body automatically and it starts to release parts of your body automatically. At this point, they sort of become the same thing. Those two processes merge together and become a kind of open release that wherever I take this process, the system knows, oh, right, things are meant to spread out and tension's meant to drain away. And you start to get this effect that wherever releases opens and wherever opens causes a release, and they both work together. And this process really feels like just getting wider and wider and wider, while more and more tension drains downward. And it tends to drain down first because that's how gravity affects us. We want to take this process to a kind of extreme where I release so much and a bit like an avalanche, you know, all this kind of tensions draining down through my body, that it starts to arrive at the feet. And from the feet, it's almost like the rubble from the avalanche starts to pile up on top of each other and fill back up through the system. And so you go from having an active opening and an active releasing to the releasing thing starting to work by itself or automatically just by where you bring this process to. And when that process is run thoroughly enough, it provides a kind of filling that comes off the back of it, an opening that comes without me trying to separate my tissues. This whole process is really interesting for a number of reasons. For those into the internal arts, it's really cool for push hands and for qigong and stuff like this. But from the perspective I'm talking about, it gives us a lot of insight and clarity and connection to what's going on inside. As I release downward, this feeling of draining that's kind of like, it starts out really slow. It starts out kind of like a molasses, honey-like waterfall of tension where the tension's just like falling down. And it tends to just get stuck in certain parts of the body. And as that weight leans on that sticking point, you get all these details about that sticking point, that blockage and where it's connected. And that's connected down to the elbow like this, and it winds down through the body like this. And it actually reveals that tension. The weight of the release, like hanging off that tension, brings details. And so you get this unraveling of details, this slow reveal, which is an opening again, of details. And eventually that thing will release. This brings me into the more critical part of what I want to do. You have the conscious mind kind of directing this process and the unconscious responding to that. And typically in the modern world, we treat the conscious as the intelligent thing and the unconscious as the dumb thing that's kind of interfering with everything that I'm doing. And my goal here is not to make me fully conscious of everything that's going on and fully in control, but rather to build the relationship between the conscious and the unconscious so that they can work together. There is a poet, an Irish poet named John O'Donoghue, who I really recommend checking out. He's got some really cool stuff. And he has this series called Anam Cara. And in that series, he talks about the modern world being like a clinical floodlight that just wants to take away every single mystery, every single shadow, every single unknown, and make everything known. And that if you have that in a physical sense, like in a room with a floodlight that's just ultra bright and there's no shadows, it becomes very cold at some point. It becomes very clinical. Warmth, on the other hand, comes from the idea of a hearth, where you have a fireplace in an old cottage, and that fire is having this kind of like dancing effect where the light gets out so far, and there's an edge to that light, and then beyond that light is shadow and darkness and hidden stuff. And that edge is kind of moving. Sometimes things are revealed and sometimes they're hidden. And this is a kind of perpetually dancing edge where one's not really winning over the other, but they're in a relationship, they're in a dance, they're in a process of, revealing and then hiding and then revealing and then hiding. And so I'm more interested in connecting to this process, this relationship between the conscious and unconscious, the relationship between the mind and the body. How can they harmonize in a way that each one trusts the other? This doesn't mean that the conscious mind will dominate the unconscious, but rather it means that the conscious mind can let the unconscious do particular things. And as that relationship improves, you'll start to trust the unconscious more. And as the trust kind of builds both ways, the unconscious will start to support the conscious, and you'll find the unconscious making changes that you would have never thought of yourself, but are really, really cool. A very easy example of this is driving. When we all first learn to drive a car and we're super conscious about, okay, foot goes there, hand goes there, this thing, it's clunky as hell. Driving becomes smooth when it shifts to the unconscious, when we're able to drive without thinking about it. And I can chit chat to my friend. I don't know about you, but I've definitely had moments in my life where I've checked out consciously and driven across town and have no idea what happened, but apparently my unconscious just steered me, pulled up at lights, indicated, changed, navigated traffic, avoided accidents, all on its own without conscious help at all. So it's like tapping into this power of the unconscious by getting the unconscious on the same page as the conscious. To bring this back around to the practices, the initial mode of practicing where we're kind of consciously directing opening, we're consciously directing releasing, is nice. It's necessary in the same way that learning to drive a car consciously at the start is necessary, but slowly we have to let go of that conscious control. We have to allow the unconscious to express these processes. And specifically, we need to allow them to do it in a way that maybe we couldn't think of ourselves, which is where this work gets really, really interesting. And it brings me to the third basic quality, which in the internal arts is called ting. It means to listen. And this term is really, really cool because this term is basically like the yin yang of the internal arts. You've got yang, which is opening, yin, which is releasing, and then yin yang, which is kind of a combination of the two. It has one part active because I'm, with my intent, I'm maybe directing where the process wants to happen. So I can point my listening at all sorts of parts of my body or all sorts of parts of the world as well. This works very, very well in animistic ideas, the capacity to listen. And it basically means I put my attention somewhere specific. With my willpower, with my intent, I keep it there and I clarify where I'm listening, but I don't at all control what I'm listening to. I listen by letting the perceptions come to me rather than diving in and trying to seize them. And this skill is basically at the heart of all the internal arts as I see them. This capacity to actively pay attention and passively receive what I'm paying attention to. It's one part yang, one part yin. And it takes a lot of practice. Typically in the start, when we try to listen to something, we, say tension appears, and I put my attention on that blockage. Usually what happens is in our mind, without us being able to help it or being able to control it, our mind is going, I'd really rather that wasn't there. And I listen to this tension with a kind of loaded intent that is telling that thing, as it is, no good. And this is already a little bit leaving the quality of ting. It's leaving the quality of listening because I'm no longer receiving the tension unconditionally, the perception unconditionally. I'm actually trying to govern it. I'm trying to tell it to change somehow. Pure listening, pure ting, does not ask the thing you're listening to change. And that's really hard because especially when we connect to parts of ourselves we don't like, we'd rather were better, then we can't help but going, oh, that's painful. I'd rather that wasn't painful. And we already project a governance at it. We project a kind of control at it from the mind. So we need to practice listening that is more pure, where I don't direct the thing I'm listening to in any way. And to do this, I need that same revealing of tensions and blockages that I'm doing in the body to happen through the mind. I need to slowly open to the breadth of my mind to reveal the mental tensions that are sitting there going, that's not good enough. That should be like this. This should be like that. Why isn't it? And this part of our mind that essentially argues with our reality, and release those arguments. And through the process of running the same process through the body, through the mind, if I can repeat that process in the mind, then I'll reveal all these like hidden agendas, these hidden intents, these hidden arguments that I have with reality. I can release them with the same releasing process, with the same essence of release. And that will make my listening better, which when applied to the body will work more effectively. And the whole thing starts to cascade and snowball, where because one's better, the other's better, because the other's, it gets better and better and better, and it accelerates. And so you have this curve that sort of starts out really slow and at some point just takes off. And in a year you can do more, or in 6 months you can do more than you could with like an entire year's training. And I'm certainly at the point now where it feels like I stand at the shops and I run this process while I'm waiting for my order, and it's like doing more in that 30 seconds than the first 10 years of my training put together. So this is the kind of the idea we want. We have to be careful not to get caught in the trap of forever wanting what's just over the hill. Because as this process starts, of course it can be better. Of course you can be more refined in this process. Of course you can be more released and more open and blah, blah, blah. And you'll talk to someone and they're like, I'm this open and I perceive all these things in the world. And we can get in this like, oh, I'm not perceiving that, so something's wrong with what I am perceiving. And that argument with reality is just another tension that I'm aiming to release, right? So anything that puts us at odds with what is something I'm trying to resolve here. I'm trying to release, including all the stuff that I can't release at this point in time. So if I connect to what is for me right at this moment, and you guys might want to follow me along this little journey, there's only so much that's going on. I've got my sense of smell. Not that good because I've smashed my nose in the past. I've got my sense of taste. I've got my sense of feeling, and maybe I can throw all the energetics in there, where I've got spatial awareness and kind of vibes from the room and atmospherics and things like this. I've got whatever I'm hearing. I've got whatever I'm seeing, and then I've got a whole bunch of stuff going on in the mind. The 5 senses can be replicated in the mind. I can imagine a smell. I can imagine a sound. I can imagine a touch. I can imagine a sight. And then beyond that, I have abstract information, reference to memory and the past, reference to knowledge that I learnt somewhere, reference to whatever projections of the future. And right, knowledge can just be like an abstract impression that the external world exists, for example. Directly speaking, this is all we ever have, right? We've just got these layers of what's going on right now. Directly speaking, there's no past, because the only reason I know there's a past is because I'm referring to a memory in the present. Directly speaking, there's no future, because the only reason I know is there's a future is because I refer to information. Directly speaking, I only have access to now, always. Everyone's completely connected to now, always. And there's just an illusion that when the attention in the now kind of zooms in on a thought that says, I'm thinking about the future or a memory of the past, that it kind of seems like it's happening in the past, but it's actually just you're aware of that in this present moment, even if you've lost everything else. So within that hierarchy, lots of those layers come and go as well. You go to sleep at night and you lose all the five senses. You've maybe got dreams and abstraction in the mind, or maybe you've just got a sense of being asleep that you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh, I had a good sleep. Why, how do I even know I had a good sleep? There were no senses there. And more interestingly, that each of these layers of perception always roughly have a central thing going on. So the vision is really easy to see this principle at work that I have at the moment, my computer screen and all you people on the screen and everything that's in front of me. And then I have the periphery of my vision. And then off the edge of that periphery, I have absolutely nothing. Beyond the periphery of my vision, there's always an absence of vision. I'm not seeing the room behind me. I'm not seeing the door there. I just have like a kind of blurry bit and then nothing. And that nothing continues on infinitely in every direction, right? It's not like at some point there's like a hole poked in that nothing and I've got vision from a different perspective. It doesn't quite work like that. I've just got the form, the periphery of the form, and then the formless. That principle can be applied through all these layers. Through the five senses, it's a lot easier to find, because as soon as you get into the mind and say, if you imagine a horse right now, where is the periphery of that imagination and where's the absence of that particular perception form? It doesn't really matter too much, but it's an interesting thought practice to just try and find the periphery and try and find the context that those things are appearing in a field of an absence of those things. This means that if I'm sitting here and I've got, whatever, some sort of wizard near me that's going, I can feel this and that going on in your system, and you can't feel that, directly speaking, that doesn't mean they're correct and you're incorrect. If you can't feel it, you can't feel it. All you're experiencing is not that feeling, but you're experiencing that person saying their thing. You're experiencing the information landing and trying to be grokked, and this idea that maybe there's something there or maybe not. The moment you go to war, to argument with what is for you, then you kind of build an internal pressure where you fight your reality. And this is one of the things I'm really interested in resolving. How can we reduce that pressure by getting ourselves more and more on the same page with what is? Again, what is has two parts. It's one part accepting just what you have at this point in time, accepting that we don't have full awareness of the world and we can never have full awareness. And there's one part, oh, it's possible to open to more awareness. If I do a drill, suddenly I can feel my shoulder better than I could 2 minutes ago. So it's possible to open to more parts of my reality. It's not pointing to an idea that there is a correct level of this, that just because you refine this and have more bodily perception, that you're better than someone who doesn't. It's not at all about this. It's about connecting to what's there for you. And then this curiosity about what else might be there. There's this mystery, right? There's these unknown landscapes in our field of experience, in our field of perception, that we can open to with appropriate practice. A musician might open to something totally different to someone who does Tai Chi. A person who trains stretching might open to something totally different to a person who's a basketballer. Person who explores the imaginal realms of the magic worlds might open to something totally different. There's so many possibilities in reality, and it's not like one of these is better than the other. but we can explore the fundamental mode of exploring that. How can we get better at the exploration rather than saying the thing I am exploring is way better than the thing you're exploring? Like, let's leave this behind and just get better at the exploring itself. So it's really about connecting to a curiosity about how you are now and what else might be going on for you right now, right in this moment. Which is where the opening idea comes to. Opening is to reveal something. Release is to release your battle with that something. So if we open to our body and it's horribly mangled and gross and tight, release means, okay, that's how it is. I'm going to accept how it is rather than trying to make it change. Open will slowly help it resolve. To tie this all back in, as we get to this opening and releasing idea and we have the ting, the listening quality in the middle, essentially what we want to get to is that the listening is almost like a spotlight of our conscious attention that we learn to put directly on things without any little hitchhikers of intent going with it. And that as soon as that light of our attention touches any form, it's done. I don't need to do anything else because I have something yang, which is the light of my consciousness, something yin, which is the form, the object that I'm looking at. You have yin yang already. It's done. Reality can take care of itself after this. The evolution can take care of itself. The whole job becomes, can I keep this attention on particular things without the little hitchhikers going along? So I can just perpetually reveal more and more of what's going on, and I can allow that thing to evolve itself. When we're looking at the body and we have a painful area, a lot of the pain is coming from me putting my mind on that thing saying that shouldn't be painful. If I can just listen to that pain and let it do its thing, often the body will start to reorganize itself. It'll release a knee, it'll move your head this way, an idea will disappear, and suddenly that pain is resolved. This is where I want to help people get to build this quality that can then be applied to anything. If I go out the back here of my house and there's a big forest here, and I've heard an idea in animism that the forest has a spirit and I can connect to that spirit, the best thing I can do, at least that I know of, is to listen for a long time, to just look at that forest, open my mind to that forest and listen without expectations of how it's meant to be. Oh, I'm an atheist, so that's not meant to be alive, so it can't talk to me. That already cuts it. Oh, I've watched Lord of the Rings, so the spirit's meant to show up to me like a green man that gives me the secrets of the world, which cuts it, you know. Whatever the projection is always interferes with what we're listening to. So to learn this base quality of listening, which is half opening to something and half releasing our expectations of this thing, is the underlying foundation that I want to get at. And this skill seems long lost in the modern world. You know, you can see just in the city when you're walking around, people just aren't listening at all. They're just perpetually projecting. And to get out of this means to accept things as they are, which is really difficult when the world's a bit messed up like it is today. Yeah, so that's the theoretical wrapping. For the next half, we'll get into the doing, the actual practices that go along with this. But before we go on, does anyone have any questions or comments or observations about all of that? It's a lot, I know.
Thank you for watching. If you'd like to learn more or support my work, head on over to my website, craigmallet.com. You're also welcome to join my community, which can be found at community.craigmallet.com or via the menu on my main website. I generally have a number of services available. If you'd like some help, just reach out. I have a student program, I have online courses, I have workshops and private consultations, all available to any who would want it. As always, to appease the algorithm gods, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and/or share.